Because I have a true prophet on today, let's just say you're not going to want to miss today's show. My name's Stephen Cochran. This is End Time Insights. I've repeatedly said I've only known two individuals that were truly caught out of their bodies to witness the end, that which is to come. One man's name is John Paul Jackson, the other Danny Davis, my former pastor, who I got to interview recently at his new church. In fact, I'll put that information down below. If you're ever in the Dallas-Fort Worth area in Texas, get in touch with the man. His information will be down below. I interviewed him and have interviewed him before because his encounter out-of-body experience lines up with this, the graph that I'll make available. He was caught out of his body for 3.5 hours, and if any of you are familiar with the book I just showed you, the graph, you'll know how that's prophetic. To recap the shows that you may not have seen, what we were talking about in the last broadcast, here's what happened to Danny. He was caught out of his body, woken out of sleep, 3 a.m. in the morning, caught up out of his house, up airplane height, maybe 30, 40, 50,000 feet above America. Jesus comes up behind him and says, "Behold." And God started showing him that which is to come. One of the things he said he saw gas prices. This was, mind you, back in 1978 when gas prices, fuel prices were 63 cents a gallon. He said God showed him that they were going to be $7, $8 a gallon. He saw a killer virus that one man could not counter, one that literally had put the fear of God into man, not what we just had, one that man could not change. He also saw basic necessities, as we discussed in the last show that we'll go back to in a second. Food, basic necessities, things you need to live by, were gone. In fact, in his encounter, he was taken down into a store where he's seeing a family. That's where we left off in the last show.
So you're seeing people's emotions. You're seeing or feeling.
I could feel different things. I could feel what masses of people were feeling. I could feel what that family was feeling. You know, the desperation. In other words,
was there a dad there? Was
there was a father and a mother, and I remember a couple of children, and they're like huddling, and I could feel
huddling even, Danny.
Well, you know how children they're afraid.
No, I mean I've never heard the actual details of
them. Yeah. They were just standing there. The store's empty. They're looking around. They've come in hoping they can get something, and there's nothing there. You know.
You at one point you said, and I don't know if this is. I'm going to assume it's probably around the same time. You said you saw soup lines. Or a soup line. I don't know what you said.
And I'm almost certain that was in Chicago. And and in fact, believe I am certain because I remember it was a major city close to Detroit, but was not Detroit, but it was Chicago. I'm almost certain of it.
Did you feel like it was just there in Detroit, or did you feel like?
Oh no! I mean, I knew these were things that I was witnessing. I knew were going on all over the United States, but I was just seeing one place. I was seeing one place it was happening. That's all, you know. But I knew, standing there looking at that was going on all throughout the country, you know. Yeah.
So could you describe? You said I think you said one time it was going on for blocks or something.
Yeah, when it was city blocks, just past big skyscrapers, they're lined up. You know, the line goes on and on. You know, for several city blocks, and I'm looking at business people that you would think would be downtown trading on the stock market or something. They're standing in line with homeless people. Everybody's in line to get a bowl of soup.
So you got the rich.
Rich and poor are all in that same line, you know.
Who need food.
They're in the same
And there's
line.
no place to get it. I'm sorry, it's a silly soup line as opposed to in the store.
Yeah, it was something that had been set up for people that were complaining they had nothing to eat, you know. So my take on it was that those that had money, it made no difference, you know. It made no difference.
People weren't prepared. I mean,
no, in the world we live in,
would not.
You can buy yourself out of things, but these people couldn't buy themselves out of that situation, you know.
So you got the rich, or basically everybody, which I guess is the significance of that. Everybody's in the line. Everybody's hungry. Nobody's got the food.
It could very possibly be an indication money was useless.
Yeah, and that again,
Yeah, money.
That
was,
is something that we're to be expected.
Yeah. But why they would be wearing suits, I don't know if that were the case. But
I think just to show that every type of person was there.
Yeah.
They may have had money.
Could have been. Symbolic,
That's my take from it.
Yeah.
I mean, if you were just looking at everybody all looked the same, then I wouldn't know what kind of.
No, it was the very poor, the very rich. They're all in the same line, you know. And there may have been symbolic meaning in that, you know, the fact that the poor and rich are in the same line, you know.
Everybody, and so there's no. Well, at least they have no access to food. I would say that I'm going to expect your currency isn't going to work. And so there's no food. We've discussed famine. We've discussed pestilence. We're even getting down to where at one point you talked about you saw people committing crime or crimes for food.
Yeah.
Because I believe one
And
of the
when you get to that center point where it goes from full color to black and white, it moves over into total chaos at that point. Yeah. It moves beyond just.
Could you explain? I'm committing crimes for food. I mean, how do
people they're just lawlessness escalated. It kept increasing as the thing went along. Lawlessness got worse and worse. You know.
So the significant part about this, though, when you said they're committing crimes, this is one of your quotes. They're committing crimes to get food.
Right.
They're committing crime just to get the food. Right. I mean,
I think so. I think people that. I think it could be said that people that probably ordinarily wouldn't have been lawless were lawless. You know, everybody was. It was dog eat dog. You know?
Mm-hmm. John Paul Jackson also said at one point. In fact, he was very specific. Again, lining up. I only know to bring people who I trust into the other. He saw the end, and he mentioned that he saw bread trucks. They actually had to start locking them and armed delivery drivers going instead of you're not talking a regular bank truck armed they're armed guards. They were arming the drivers just to deliver where there was food.
I believe that. I didn't see it, but I believe that.
That's what he said, and it lines up kind of people committing crime just to get food and
just to get by.
Just to eat. Folks, why not prepare and have a couple extra things to eat? Why not get yourself some canned food? Why not? It'll stay for years, even way past the expiration date. I'm telling you, that's kind of a gimmick in itself that I'm not going to get into. But there's no reason not to have some extra food. We've witnessed chaos. We witnessed things go up and down, and we're not in charge of it. And it rains upon the just and the unjust. So I want you to think probably about having some extra things to eat. You were at one point, and I don't know if this is at the black and white portion, so maybe you may want to mention if it is. You were, in fact, I don't think it is. You were taken at one point to where you were taken across the world. Was this early on too, where you got to go to the?
My sense of it, in what I remember, is early on in this encounter I had with Christ. Only for a short amount of time I was removed out of the United States. I knew I was being taken out of the United States. I was actually being taken all the way around the world, and I knew it. I knew I was at the speed of thought. I was being transported to the Middle East, and
some things you did when the pandemic, that was worldwide too, if I was understanding correctly.
Yep.
So some of this is in America, but for instance, on the pandemic or the virus, that was worldwide.
Yeah.
Okay. So I just wanted to clarify. Some things are in America.
I think the majority of it was in America. For what reason, I don't know. But at the point I was taken around the world, I wouldn't say like being taken on an airplane. I was taken at the speed of thought. Just bang. I knew that I was on the opposite side of the world. In the Middle East.
I'm sorry. I'm fascinated.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And so now I'm hovering up in the air over the Euphrates River, and I asked the Lord, "Where am I at?" And this is the Euphrates River. So I'm allowed to zoom down, but the area I'm looking at is no longer a river, it's dried up. Now, I remember someone, when I talked about this a little 40 years ago, they said, Danny Davis, there's no dry spots in the Euphrates River. There wasn't back then. Because I didn't really have a strong inclination to preach about this. On a rare occasion, if someone asked me to, I would talk about it some. But the Euphrates River, the area I was hovering over, it was dry. It was dry.
Dried up.
And
the Euphrates was dry.
It was dry.
That's biblical too.
This part
That's
of the
biblical,
river,
folks.
yeah.
This is biblical.
And I know people don't know who I am. They may have a hard time understanding this.
It's fine.
But you've got to understand, I don't have your knowledge of Bible prophecy, and some of these things I discovered decades later. For instance, I was over that dry river bed, that area of the Euphrates River, and I kind of did a study on the Euphrates River just in the last couple of years. It's like 1,800 miles long. That's like 2/3 of the length of the United States. Okay, so but the area I was over in that riverbed, it was dry.
But then back in 1978,
there was no dry.
Yeah, well,
it was a thriving river
Yeah.
when I had my vision, and
Yep.
and so I asked the Lord. I said, why are we here? And I'm looking again, like through that magnifying glass, whatever you want to call it. I don't know what you would even call it.
almost like a telescope kind
Almost
of thing.
like a telescope in
Yeah.
a sense, but it's in a sense it was like a telescope. In a sense, it was like God's supernatural way of allowing me to zero in on things. But I'm looking, and all of a sudden, I began to see teeming thousands of frogs coming up out of that riverbed, and these are not ordinary frogs. They're slithering over each other, but
They're not cute little tadpoles.
no, they're not little tadpoles. These are ugly.
Sure.
Ugly.
I wouldn't want them for like a little pet.
No. I said, God, what is this? Because these frogs, you could look right through them, and they were like the only way I've ever known to describe it is if you fill a gallon sandwich bag full of water and look through it, it amplifies a little bit. That's what these frogs, you could look right through them.
This is biblical, Danny. Again, more biblical, folks. If you know Revelation, this is biblical. Frogs coming. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, I wouldn't have known that.
That's strange. What's this frog thing? I'm going to go demonic.
These things are coming up in mass out of that dry part of the riverbed. And I asked the Lord, I said, what is this? And the Lord said, these are demon spirits that were held in chains for the last days. They're being released upon the earth.
That's specific, too.
Yeah, it was I mean, there was no question. These were demons that had not been active in the earth up until that point in time, but they were coming up, slithering over each other by the thousands.
That's disgusting, and that is, again, prophetic and biblical, and out of the Euphrates. I'm just saying, but Danny, for you to see it and describe it like this, and then I can ask you this about what you saw is I find extraordinary.
Well, they had the power to be, as I watched, to go to any part of the earth they chose to go to, and I'm watching again. I'm being allowed to zero in specifically, and I'm seeing people who I knew their hearts were evil. These were people that had influence.
You knew that.
I knew instantly. These were people that had influence over masses of people. Whether they were celebrities or whether they were politicians or whether they were rock singers, I could see them. These frogs were hitting all these different groups of people.
Sounds like selective, even.
Selectively.
They wanted the people that had influence.
Selectively, yeah, they were.
Very
these were the
interesting.
ones that had the most influence, and these things, when they would get to their appointed individual they were to enter into, they would leap right into their chest. They would go right through their flesh into their chest. But here's the crazy thing. I don't know how else to even describe it. All of a sudden, everywhere I saw these people that were becoming possessed by these demon spirits, they all began to simultaneously say the same thing. They all knew the agenda. The agenda didn't matter where in the earth they were. The agenda was the same for all of them. They all spoke in unison.
So there was purpose. It wasn't
There
just.
was purpose in it. The demons that spoke through them, they knew how for there to be agreement. whatever the end time agenda was, the demonic agenda, the Antichrist agenda, they all knew to speak the same thing.
That is so wild to think that. I mean, and so that they are being selective. They want to make sure their influence or their objective is being delivered through people who have influence.
I don't want to make anyone mad by what I'm about to say, because you talk about how these things are, how close these things are. But I was watching the other day the liberal news media. This was the key. They use key words. I've noticed that, and it ties right into my encounter I had for 3.5 hours. These people that are on the wrong side of things, they all have the same key words.
Isn't that weird?
It's very weird. A week and a half ago, the word was chaos, and they were talking about Donald Trump. Chaos. Every one of them. It didn't matter if it was a senator in Washington or a news broadcaster on a liberal news station. They all had the same key word, chaos. That was the word they were using a couple of weeks ago. And if you watch, they do this all the time, which is very, very similar to what I saw when these frogs were going into people,
We're not saying the frogs have already arrived or anything like that. I don't know whether they have or not, but
I think it may be a foreshadowing. It may be a foreshadowing.
I'll go with that. They're already gearing up for it. They're getting ready. This is the way it's going to go.
I think there are spirits in these people.
I'm sure.
Even if they're not those frogs, all those frogs just bring them all into unison.
Which they kind of almost are. I mean, and if they ain't already there, I would assume. I mean, the frogs are really going to make it happen.
Oh yeah,
and they're already in tune and everything.
That's what I believe. That's
horrible.
I think people are already heading that direction. These demonic spirits are just going to make it all come together.
That's horrible. I want to point out that you didn't. When we're about to get into some stuff that people are probably going to want to know how. I mean, I'm assuming, which I've already hypothesized, that why the pestilence or the virus is there. It's an hypothesis. It's not no proof, and you don't necessarily know why.
No,
or what.
I don't.
What caused the virus? We don't necessarily know what caused the soup line, though we can hypothesize.
Yeah, you can try and scratch your head and say, well, perhaps it's this, perhaps it's that.
You didn't see causes as much as you saw the effects.
I saw effects. Yeah. I wasn't in the laboratory knowing exactly why these things were happening. I just was seeing them.
So it was more aftermath. I mean, like what?
I think so. The after effects. Yeah. Like the soup lines. I don't know if we mentioned them or not.
We just mentioned the soup line.
Okay. Well, when I saw the soup lines in Chicago, I'm certain it was Chicago because I remember ricocheting off from the area I was in Michigan, and it was like the next big city over. I felt myself move over there. The rich and the poor were in that line, and they were both in the same boat. The homeless man and the millionaire were all in the same line. They needed food.
I keep thinking we don't know what that's like.
No.
I don't think anybody knows unless you're homeless and I'm not saying everybody that's homeless has selected it or chosen it, but I know there are ways out if people will actually, dust themselves off, get up and go get a job. Just saying, there's a lot of homeless out there that don't have to be homeless, but if you are forced.
Well, let me put it this way, Steve. The world we live in right now, there's order to it. The world I saw as this 3.5 hour thing that I saw happen in the spirit, the order disappeared after a while. The only order that I saw began to arise was a militaristic order, and then of course I saw warfare over that. But
we're going to get to that.
Yeah,
I'm going to give a quote even here. Where we're headed. We're not going to move all entirely into it, but. Here's a quote from you, quotations. You said you saw lawlessness, a breakdown of order across the country, rioting, destruction, fires, senseless murder, chaos, theft by force. Now we're going to be covering all of that, and so I'm not going to try to even get any of that out of you at the moment. Right. That's what's going to be in the next show. You're not going to want to miss that show. But if you can, did you hear what I just said? Lawlessness, a breakdown of order across the country, rioting, destruction, fires, senseless murder, chaos, theft by force. Oh my Lord. That's not any place I know as America. That's not any place I even understand as America. And I'm so sorry, folks. I am sorry that you're having to think, okay, the initial reactions of anybody who has any brains or, sense to them would not want to think anything like this. The breakdown of order.
Right.
Across the country. Destruction. Across the country. And now you did say that. Death and destruction, which I'll get to. Death and destruction across coast to coast is what you said.
If you take this book, the vision that I wrote, about what I saw, and you divide the book right down the middle, you've got a seam here. The only way I know to describe what I saw is there were two parts to it. This part, when I saw it, during that 3.5 hours that I had this encounter, my spirit man had this encounter with Christ. This part was fully in color, but there came a moment. There was a moment in time when I hit that seam, and I knew this side over here. I continued to see things, but they were in stark black and white. They were no longer in color. And I felt a removal. The only way I've known to put it, whenever I've ever shared this, is I felt grace depart.
Grace removed. You see that
when grace was removed, now we're over here. Mm-hmm. This part's hopeless over
black
here.
Black and white.
Yeah.
So color. It's almost like the Wizard of Oz. The beginning of the movie is black and white, and all of a sudden she goes to Oz and it's color. This is the opposite, but it does tell you where you are or what's going on. Grace is in color. God's there, and the other half, but grace is gone.
Even this side over here, man was doing everything he knew to do to deal with all of this chaos, but and there was some success and some failure. But boy, when it hit over here, it was hopeless, and it began to snowball at that point, and I knew things weren't going to get any better. They were headed for a cataclysmic.
So in the beginning, to just kind of what you were inferring is, in the beginning there was the ability, or at least the desire to straighten things, to fix things, to correct the issues.
People were working on it right now,
like we're doing right now. Coincidentally,
right now, even in our current administration, they're trying to deal with things that happened the last 4 years.
Yeah, well, how they messed it up.
Yeah. So in other words, okay, here's our problem, here's our solution. I saw people trying to deal with things way worse than anything we've seen at this point, but with some success. But boy, when it got over here, you can forget it. It's
gone.
It was iron fisted at that point.
Mm-hmm. Which we're going to discuss in the next show, maybe even in a behind the scenes show. I got it. You when you came back, we're going to kind of condense this. You came back at one point to where you left the Euphrates after these frogs, these slithering, disgusting,
demonic spirits. They were demonic spirits. The Lord told me they were demonic spirits that had been bound in chains.
And again, Danny, you didn't know that was biblical?
No, I did.
You didn't
because
know
it's never been. I've been a healing evangelist. I've gone around giving altar calls and leading people to Christ and praying for the sick for the better part of my life. But I've never had your gift of Bible prophecy. It's never been something. So a lot of these things I've found out by talking to you, that they have biblical significance that I didn't know they had,
And I want people to know that so God is your witness. This is not something you put together. You had one man called you and wanted to see if you were real. I mean,
I had a man tell me I was a phony because I was asked to speak down in Virginia about this early on, and this would have been very late 1970s, early 1980s. Probably within a few years of having had this encounter with Christ. Of course, in the end of the vision, and we'll share more about it, I saw Red China attacking the United States and using a fleet of ships, but they didn't exist, 40 years ago. There were no Chinese ships.
And
Some man told me I was a false prophet. He said, there's no Chinese ships. They don't have warships. He said, do you know what he told me, you know what a fool you made out of yourself tonight. And I said, well, I don't know anything about that. I just told him, I said, I just know what I saw. Well,
I'm sorry for laughing.
He told me, that I was a fake, that there are no Chinese ships. Now, this would have been maybe in 1980 or something like that.
Yeah.
And there weren't back then, So we're looking at it, 40 years later, there certainly are now.
We're going to wrap up this segment here pretty quick, but I want to, because of things like that, and people say, like even a person who called you up, you told me, at least in a story here recently, he saw you through me and wanted to verify that you were true because he wasn't sure that you were.
Yeah, I received a letter randomly from someone, and they said, well, I'm trying to decide if you're for real or not. Well, I don't try and. I never wrote the guy back because
What's to say?
Yeah, right. What do you say to somebody? I'm trying to figure out if you're for real or not. Well, what do I tell you? You have to decide that for yourself, I guess.
Yeah, I don't like when people attack people who are for real, and this is for real, and I want y'all to know that. So you didn't have a lot of knowledge of any of this, and I know that, Danny, and that's what again made it so authentic.
Well, I would like to reiterate something that in the very beginning I said. My audience with Christ for 3.5 hours was not because I was such a fantastic preacher. My audience was because I decided to quit.
Yeah, but I mean.
Yeah.
You're authentic. You're for real.
I don't let my ego run away with me because I realize, God preached to a jackass one time to a backslidden prophet. So if he can use a donkey, I somehow figure like maybe he can use me too. Yeah, so.
Well, yeah, maybe you won't. I know you won't say this of yourself. You are a prophet, and I know you're a prophet.
You've said that. I don't know.
I
don't know if I am or if I'm not.
You are.
But I really appreciate you saying that.
You are.
The reason I brought Danny onto the show and the shows to come is because his encounter, out-of-body experience, lines up with this book called The Graph. Folks, if you want to get this book and preview this book, the things he saw are portrayed in here, are seen in here, and scripturally, things you've never seen. Go over to CochranMinistries.com. There'll be a video there that'll give you the first 9 chapters of this book for free. It just plays from one video to the next. If you like what you see, get the book. You're not going to want to miss the shows to come where Danny says he saw death and destruction coast to coast. Look for more to come. Until next time, take care and God bless.